Hi, my name's Amy, and my father called me his biggest failure in front of hundreds of people at his retirement gala. But what hurt more than his words was realizing everyone around him already believed it because they had helped erase me long before that night ever came. They cut me from the slideshow, left my name off the program, replaced my gift with someone else's. They rewrote the story without me. So I gave him a little box, and just one sentence that made the whole room freeze. But what was inside that box? And why did it change everything? The flight from Seattle touched down before sunrise, but the weight in my chest had been building long before the plane ever left the ground. Austin still smelled the same sun-baked concrete, mesquite smoke, and old guilt. The kind that lingers in the corners of your ribs, even after years apart. I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 months. The silence wasn't unusual, it was the default. And yet, here I was, flying 2 states over just to sit quietly in the shadows of his retirement gala. Not for him. For me. The Driscoll Hotel loomed with its grand stone columns and velvet accents like a southern monarch that refused to age. I stood in the lobby longer than I needed to, not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what this place represented, every room curated for pride, every detail a mirror to reflect back the version of him he wanted the world to see. I checked in under my own name. That would become ironic later. In my suite, I pulled the dress from its plastic cover, steam-pressed but simple. Not showy, not forgettable. I'd spent more time choosing the wrapping paper for the box tucked inside my carry-on than I had on what to wear. Navy blue, with a thin silver ribbon. Understated. Intentional. Inside was something small, something he had kept for over 2 decades. I wasn't here to make a speech. I wasn't even listed in the program as a guest of honor. And that was fine. Expected even. But part of me still hoped for something. Maybe just the dignity of being acknowledged. By the time I arrived at the ballroom, the space was already half full. Servers wove between tables like practiced dancers. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I approached the check-in desk. The young woman smiled politely. Name? Amy Colburn. She frowned at her list, finger scrolling, then tapping. Oh, you're... Maya Colburn? No, Amy. Another pause. You're at table 19. Table 19 was in the back, past the sponsors, past the engineers, even behind the local press. My place card had a typo Maya. The irony wasn't lost on me. I slid into the seat without protest. The linen napkin was already folded like a swan. A man in a beige jacket next to me leaned in. You with catering? I blinked. No. He chuckled, sipping his wine. Sorry. Thought you looked familiar. I didn't correct him. I'd grown used to being misfiled, misnamed, mislabeled. It was safer to stay quiet and let people build their own convenient narratives. The lights dimmed. The slideshow began. Large screens flickered to life above the stage, displaying a montage of Virgil Kessler's life in 30-second intervals. Childhood photos, teenage football trophies, wedding shots, boardroom triumphs. Then came the family section. Denton's military commendations, Callista's PR awards, their wedding, the birth of their daughter. More applause. Then more pictures, Virgil shaking hands with congressmen, giving keynote addresses, standing beside rocket prototypes. Not a single frame included me. Not my high school science award, not my college graduation, not my promotion to lead systems engineer. Not even the blurry photo from when I visited Mom in the hospital that one Thanksgiving. It was as if I'd never existed. Someone at the table whispered, "Didn't know Virgil only had 2 kids." Another replied, "Maybe she's like PR team or something?" I excused myself. The hallway outside was quiet, carpeted, heavy with the kind of insulation that kept power brokers' secrets from escaping. I leaned against the cool marble wall near the restroom and let the sting behind my eyes dissolve before it could turn into tears. I wasn't going to cry in a hallway, not for a man who hadn't asked about me in years. My phone buzzed. A message half-typed sat unsent. They didn't even get my name right. I considered sending it to my mother, then deleted it. In the mirror, I fixed my hair, smoothed my lipstick, and whispered to my reflection, "You came for you. Don't forget that." And I wouldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. When someone rewrites your history long enough, you start picking up the pen whether you're ready or not. The applause hadn't even faded when the ballroom lights dimmed again. A soft instrumental played, one of those nostalgic tracks that always suggested something profound was coming. I knew what came next. My father, Virgil Kessler, master of ceremony, hero of his own narrative, would take the stage. The room shifted in anticipation. Champagne glasses were straightened. Chairs scooted forward. Every eye turned toward the man who'd built both a defense company and his own myth from the ground up. He approached the podium like a general. I'd seen him command rooms before briefings with the Pentagon, investor summits, school fundraisers. But tonight, his gait was even more precise. His navy suit, tailored within an inch of arrogance, held every thread of his legacy together. He began with the expected a deep breath, a pause, and a smile perfectly rehearsed. "It's hard to believe it's been 42 years, he said. 42 years of building, leading, and learning. But none of it would mean a thing without family." The room warmed. People nodded. "Denton," he continued, turning toward my brother, "you've made me proud every step of the way. Your discipline, your service, your loyalty to the legacy." Applause followed. Denton raised his glass in a modest, controlled salute. He knew this script by heart. My stomach began to harden. I glanced toward my mother, sitting 5 tables over. Her eyes stayed fixed on her folded hands. "And to my daughter-in-law, Callista," Virgil went on, smiling directly at her. "You came into our lives and became the daughter I never had but always hoped for." There it was. The daughter I never had. Those words didn't just echo, they pierced, like a bell rung directly into my bones. Callista, perfectly composed, leaned into the praise like it was sunlight. She touched her chest, mouthed, "Thank you," as if she hadn't orchestrated her way into every family photo I was excluded from. Applause swelled again. Some guests stood to clap. The lighting caught the shimmer of her gown, the glass in her hand, the ring Virgil had insisted on gifting her personally after the wedding. I didn't move, not an inch. He wasn't finished. "Of course," he added, letting his voice drop to that folksy, faux humble tone he saved for impact. "Not every child chooses to follow the path. Some take different roads. And that's okay. Sometimes they're reminders of what doesn't work. They teach you what failure looks like." There wasn't laughter at first. Just an awkward pause. Then, a polite chuckle or two. The kind that floats through a room when people aren't sure if a joke is safe to laugh at. I didn't need to hear my name. Every nerve in my body recognized the outline of an insult dressed up as philosophy. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for my drink. I let the weight of the moment settle around me like fog. Denton glanced in my direction, then quickly away. Callista adjusted her necklace, pretending not to notice. And my mother, God. My mother. She still stared at her lap. The worst part wasn't the dig. The worst part was that no one flinched. A waiter appeared beside me with a fresh flute of champagne. I waved it off. He left it anyway. This was the moment most people would get up and leave. I didn't. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because walking out would have felt like conceding a game I didn't agree to play. So I stayed. I sat there through the closing remarks, through the final toast, through more laughter and praise and well-earned nostalgia that had no space carved out for me. As the lights brightened and the stage cleared, I heard someone at a nearby table murmur, "She's got to be PR or something. No way she's family." I didn't look. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened a text to my best friend back in Seattle. He did it. Called me a failure. On stage. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. The navy blue box under my table brushed against my ankle. It had stayed there, untouched. Quiet. Just like me. I glanced toward the stage again. My father was shaking hands, smiling for photos, holding Callista's elbow like she was the prize at the end of a race I was never invited to run. This would be the last time I let him write my story. If you erase someone long enough, you start to believe they were never there, unless they start writing themselves back in. I stepped out into the corridor, while the gala buzzed on without me. The low hum of clinking glasses and muffled laughter faded as the thick hotel walls swallowed the noise. The carpet was soft beneath my heels, but the chill in the air conditioning seeped right through the silk of my dress. For a moment, I let myself lean against the cool marble, my eyes drifting over the tall ceilings and mahogany accents that reminded me of conference centers where my father used to speak. He loved a microphone, loved an audience even more. I'd grown up watching him dominate rooms like this, lecturing on leadership, innovation, legacy. Always that word, legacy. He'd say it like it was holy, like it needed to be protected, passed down, polished until it gleamed. But I had once stood on a stage of my own. That memory had waited quietly for years, and now it returned like a tide I couldn't stop. I was 28 when I got the letter. I'd been chosen to represent the U.S. in a multinational aerospace initiative. Only 10 scientists were selected nationwide, the kind of opportunity that builds careers, that changes lives. There was just one thing missing, a signature from an industry sponsor. And with my affiliation to Kessler Advanced, his company, Virgil, was the natural choice. My choice. I remember sitting across from him in his office. It still smelled like old wood and expensive ink. I handed him the form with a hopeful smile. He read it, paused, then handed it back without looking me in the eye. "I can't sign this," he said flatly. I blinked. Why not? If I sign off, it'll look like nepotism. Or worse, like I'm soft. You know how this works. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed around the words I'd wanted to shout. "You'll have other chances," he said, standing, already done with the conversation. But I didn't get another chance. That program only ran once, and I hadn't had another sponsor. Not one who could carry the same weight. That night, I sat in my Seattle apartment, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it felt too familiar, too expected to be shocked by it. What hurt more was realizing that I didn't even argue. I let it happen. I let him close the door. Now, years later, standing in that hallway with the sound of my own father celebrating the people he approved of, I understood something new. He hadn't feared nepotism. He feared me being seen. He feared that if I stood on a stage without him controlling the spotlight, people might realize there was another kind of brilliance in this family, one that didn't wear a uniform or bear his last name like a badge of loyalty. My entire life had been a silent choreography of stepping aside, staying in the frame, but never in focus. Every time I dared to step forward, someone would tug my sleeve with a reminder. Don't outshine your brother. Or worse, don't make your father uncomfortable. It wasn't humility. It was erasure disguised as virtue. I'd mistaken quiet for strength. But silence had never protected me. It only protected their illusion. I didn't know how long I stood there before the ballroom doors opened, and 2 guests stepped out, deep in conversation about some policy memo. I stepped aside politely, then made my way back upstairs. The hotel suite was too pristine, too artificial. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-open closet. The navy box was still in my bag, untouched, waiting. Just like me. I reached for the notepad on the desk and pulled the pen from the leather folio beside it. The pages were blank, inviting. At the top, I wrote, "What they took from me." Then I paused, letting the ink dry before I added the first line. 2009. Denied international representation. Reason, inconvenient success. I used to think staying quiet was loyalty. Now I see it was permission. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, robe knotted around my waist, steam curling out of the hotel coffee cup beside me. On the table lay the updated event program that had been slid under my door sometime in the night. I flipped it open, more out of habit than curiosity. My name wasn't there. Page 6, Voices of the Next Generation. A segment meant to showcase the family's continuing legacy. Originally, I had been invited to speak for 3 minutes. A brief reflection, nothing formal. Now, that space belonged to my brother, Denton Jr., once again cast as the rightful heir. I didn't feel rage. Not immediately. Just that sharp, cold pressure in my chest. The same kind you get when someone slams a car door too hard near your ear. Sudden, stunning, loud, even in its silence. There was no note, no explanation. But the ink on the program was fresh, the decision clearly made after the gala's first half. I dressed slowly. Gray dress, minimal jewelry. The box stayed in my luggage, still sealed, still waiting. By noon, I made my way to the event planning table near the lobby. A young woman smiled from behind a laptop. "Hi. I had a question about the program update. I noticed my segment is no longer listed." She typed, eyes scanning the screen. "Oh, yes. I believe that change came directly from the family. Said they preferred a unified message." I nodded. "I see." She gave a polite smile, already moving to the next task. I thanked her because that's what I was trained to do and turned away. My hands didn't shake, but every step I took back toward the elevators felt heavier than the last. Later that afternoon, I found my mother sitting alone in one of the hotel's quieter lounges, a floral teacup balanced on her knee like an afterthought. I didn't ask if she knew I already did. She looked up and smiled, small and hesitant. "Everything okay?" I sat across from her. "Did you agree with it?" She shifted in her seat, smoothing her blouse like it would buy her time. "It wasn't my call, Amy. They just thought maybe this wasn't the moment to reopen things." "Reopen what? Me? Existing?" Her mouth opened, closed again. "Don't make this into a confrontation. This is a celebration. For him. For the family. And for me?" She looked down at her tea. I pressed, my voice steady. "You stood beside him while he called me a failure. You heard it. You said nothing." "I didn't want to make it worse," she whispered. "For who?" She didn't answer. "You've always said I was strong. Strong enough to survive what he couldn't admit. But do you know what that's cost me?" Her eyes filled but didn't spill. "I know you. You'll land on your feet." That was it. That was all I was ever given, strength as a consolation prize, survival as a badge. I stood before she could say anything else and walked back to my room. The hallway felt narrower than before, the carpet thicker under my shoes. Inside, I reached for the notebook I had started the night before. The pen moved faster now. 2023. Speech revoked without notice. Reason, inconvenient presence. I stared at the words until they blurred slightly. Still, I didn't cry. This wasn't grief, it was data. The truth was this. My silence had always been a service, a structure. It allowed their version of the family to stand unshaken. The moment I spoke, the cracks would show. And they knew that. That's why they never had to ask me to stay quiet. They trusted I would. Until now. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memo app. I didn't hesitate. I'd already written the message in my mind. One more cut like this, and bringing the truth to the stage myself. I saved the recording. No title. Just a timestamp. Proof that the line had been drawn. The box under the bed was still untouched, but it no longer felt passive. It felt like a signal, and I was getting closer to lighting it. They always said silence was strength, that silence was grace. But I've come to learn silence is also decay. It's how a legacy crumbles quietly, eaten from the inside, while everyone smiles at the facade. The drive to Lakeway wasn't planned. I told myself I needed air, but what I really needed was proof. Proof that my memory hadn't lied, that there had once been love in a place now stripped of it. Something about the old house, my mother's house, still pulled at me, even after all they'd done. I didn't want it back. I just wanted to remember it right. When I pulled up, I didn't recognize the entrance. The old creaky wooden gate had been replaced by a sleek, matte black security system with motion sensors and a coded entry pad. A brushed steel plaque glinted on a freshly stacked limestone pillar. The Kessler residence. It looked like a property listing on a luxury real estate site, not a home where a woman once knitted on a porch swing and drank tea from a chipped mug. The landscaping had changed too. Gone were the ivy vines that once climbed the siding like green lace. Gone were the azalea bushes I planted when Mom finished her favorite pink blooms ripped out and replaced by gravel and sterile rows of Italian cypress. It was beautiful in the way a showroom is beautiful, detached, hollow, curated for strangers. But beneath the makeover, I still saw fingerprints mine. The drainage system I designed when the backyard flooded every spring, still there, buried, working. The custom stone patio I paid for when Dad refused to deal with the cracking cement, still holding. The HVAC system, the insulation, the replacement roof, all covered by me. Every one of those repairs happened on my dime while Mom was sick. I wired Denton over $60,000 for it. No contracts, no receipts, just trust. And in return, nothing. No name, no mention. I didn't get out of the car. Just sat there, engine off, hands in my lap, staring at the wind chime that still dangled from the eave above the kitchen window. I'd bought it at a garden center one spring, hung it up while Mom sat wrapped in a shawl, laughing as I tried to steady the ladder. It hadn't moved much today, just a soft sway in the breeze, like it remembered me. And yet, now, the house stood under a name that wasn't mine. Its foundations supported by my quiet sacrifices, its stories rewritten to feature everyone but me. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the bar downstairs from my hotel. The place was dimly lit, quite exactly what I needed. I wasn't in the mood for wine or anything strong. Ginger ale felt honest. Clean. That's when I heard Denton's voice. He was holding court at a nearby table, his laugh carrying just far enough to make me flinch. I turned slightly and saw him clinking glasses with one of Dad's old work buddies, a man whose name I couldn't remember, but whose laugh I'd heard at dozens of holiday dinners. "Lakeway looks fantastic," the man said. "You've really done wonders with it." Denton smiled like he'd painted the Sistine Chapel. Just wanted to modernize it, make it livable. That was enough. I stood and walked over, my steps quiet but deliberate. He noticed me before I reached them. He turned slowly, smirked like we were kids again, and I was overreacting to nothing. "Did you ever intend to give me credit for what I did?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Credit? The house." He shrugged, still smiling. "It was for Mom. You wouldn't want to make it about money now, would you?" I didn't clench my jaw. I didn't raise my voice. I just said what needed saying. It was never about the money. It was about memory. But even that seems like too much to ask. He didn't answer. Just turned back to his conversation, dismissing me like background noise in a room filled with men who never once lifted a checkbook while I was draining my savings. That night, I skipped dinner. I went back to my room and opened the notebook I'd carried for years. Not a journal, more like a record. A ledger of all the things they forgot I gave. 2017 renovation. Payment never acknowledged. Outcome, ownership erased. I drew a line underneath. But it didn't feel like a line. It felt like a wall. They always spoke about family like it was sacred. A bond. A fortress. But what I've come to understand is that family, in our case, was a one-way contract. One where the fine print read, "You give, we forget." One where labor was silent, and silence was expected. I sat with that thought as the clock ticked toward midnight. One more theft, I promised myself. One more dismissal. One more erasure of my name from what I built, and it'd stop playing the quiet one. I wouldn't announce it. It'd document it. And when the time came, it'd answer with facts, not forgiveness. Because silence may be grace, but it is not justice. If they needed a show to hear me, then I gave them one. But the real reckoning still sat unopened quiet, patient, and heavier than its size suggested. By the time dessert plates were cleared, and the MC made his final rounds with a forced smile and a hollow, "Let's give one more round of applause for Mr. Kessler," The energy in the room had shifted. Applause came out of obligation, not admiration. Laughter was measured. Everything now felt staged, like the curtain had dropped, but no one had the courage to leave the theater. I returned to my seat like a misplaced shadow, uninvited, unclaimed, and somehow still present. The people I once called family didn't even acknowledge my return. I sat there, folding the napkin on my lap, not to clean, not to fidget, but to remind myself I could still feel something. Fabric, pressure, proof of my own existence. My name was still missing from the event program. No mention, not a word. I looked around the table. Denton was deep in conversation with a defense contractor 2 seats down, all handshake and eye contact playing the part of the respectable heir. Callista was smiling at her phone, probably curating the perfect caption for a filtered photo. Family is everything. And my mother? Her spine stiff with practiced posture, she sat like a sculpture of elegance, unmoving, unseeing, untouchable. And Virgil? He was basking, reclining just enough to appear casual, yet alert to every glance tossed his way, like a king among courtiers. His voice had softened into humility now that the praise was winding down, but the smugness clung to his face like a second skin. Not one of them looked at me. I finished the last of my wine. It had gone warm in my hand, the taste now more like vinegar than vintage. I didn't wince. I let it linger. Bitterness deserved to be tasted fully. Beneath the table, my foot found the box. Still there, wrapped in navy paper, unopened, untouched, like me. They didn't think I'd bring it, didn't think I had it in me to disrupt their perfect narrative. They assumed it'd sit quietly, swallow hard, and vanish again like always. But I had stopped living in the version of myself they wrote. The moment came not with a roar, but with a hum, the lull between courses, between conversations. I stood slowly. No drama, no gasp, just movement with intention. Enough to draw a few glances from adjacent tables. The click of my heels cut across the hush of clinking cutlery and murmured chats. I didn't go to the stage. I didn't grab a mic. I walked directly to Virgil's table. The center of the spotlight, the place reserved for the hero of the night. He looked up, startled at first. Then recognition kicked in, followed by that default smile he wore like a medal. Charming, hollow. Then he saw the box. His smile faltered. I placed it in front of him, gently but firmly. No theatrics, no speech. "This is for you," I said. Calm. Even. He blinked, confused, reaching for the ribbon like a child on Christmas morning, unaware the gift might contain something heavier than joy. I leaned in just slightly, my voice low but clear-aimed perfectly, for the lapel mic still clipped to his jacket. "From your biggest failure, enjoy your retirement." And I turned. No pause. No glance over the shoulder. No appetite for their reaction. The ballroom behind me froze for a second. A breathless, charged silence. Then the sound of whispers, sharp, stunned, electric. Someone let out a laugh, startled and involuntary. A few clapped awkwardly, unsure if it was rebellion or support. I passed Callista Hare's smile, now twitching with uncertainty. My mother stared straight ahead, her hands twisted together like she was holding back a scream. Denton looked pale. I didn't stop. I walked past the linen-draped tables, past the golden centerpieces and the fake smiles, and out the heavy ballroom doors. The night air outside was brisk and honest. Not performative, just there cool against my skin, sobering in a way no wine ever could be. Under the valet canopy, I stood for a long moment, staring up at the stars blurred by city light. My breath came out in small clouds, proof I was still warm, still alive, still here. My phone buzzed in my bag. I didn't look. I didn't need to. No part of me wanted to know what came next. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't wait for an apology or validation. What I felt was anchored, like a puzzle piece had finally slid into place after years of forcing it where it didn't belong. There was no victory dance, no cinematic music, just the sound of my own pulse and the quiet that follows when you've told the truth out loud, and it echoes. That was just chapter 1. What came next would be mine to write. Without them. Without permission. Without apology. If I was invisible before, now I was a mirror. And the family couldn't look away. He didn't open it right away. Of course he didn't. Virgil was always calculated when it came to image, and ripping open a box from the daughter he'd just humiliated on stage would have broken the rhythm of the night. Instead, he carried it like a delicate prop into the private lounge behind the ballroom, where only board members, donors, and people who talked in six-figure abbreviations were allowed. But someone followed him. Not me. Someone else. Someone holding a phone. The video didn't show much, just him sitting in a leather armchair, the box on the coffee table, his fingers undoing the ribbon like it might explode. Then he lifted the lid and froze. Inside was a photograph. I was 12, holding a blue ribbon at the Austin Regional Science Fair. He had his hand on my shoulder, smiling genuinely, not like in the photos with politicians. It was the only moment I remember when he looked at me without disappointment layered behind his eyes. Beneath the photo was a note. You were proud. Once. And below that, a folder. Thick, clearly labeled, Funding Sources 2021 Defense Grant Initiative. He flipped it open. First page, schematic diagrams he'd seen before. Second page, internal memos, typed proposals, annotated graphs. All familiar. What he hadn't seen, what made his shoulders stiffen in the grainy clip were the signatures. My name, my initials. The drafts from when I had consulted quietly, from afar, to help keep the company afloat during their lowest quarter. No credit had ever been given publicly. The final published version bore no resemblance to me, but the architecture, the backbone, it was mine. He closed the folder abruptly. The video cut out there, but it had already circulated by the next morning. Group chats, whispered texts. One board member even forwarded it to me, unintentionally, through a reply-all mistake. Who is she to him, again? One message read. Another answered, the daughter he never talks about. It didn't take long for someone else to make a connection. Years ago, an anonymous technical proposal had been submitted through the company's open research initiative. It had saved a critical contract. The style matched. The phrasing matched. A board member who still had archived drafts sent them to the company archivist. And to me, I didn't confirm anything. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking on my behalf. By midweek, I was getting passive-aggressive calls from Denton. Hey, just wondering if you had time to chat, he'd said with the fake warmth of someone standing on a rug that was being yanked. I didn't respond. Virgil was summoned to an informal meeting with the board. According to someone who was in the room, he downplayed the whole thing. She wasn't looking for credit, he reportedly said. It was internal. We all benefited. The silence that followed must have been deafening. They asked for formal clarification. He declined. That was the moment it shifted. I walked through the hotel lobby that evening, wearing the same jacket I'd had since grad school. Nothing flashy, nothing curated. But this time, people looked up. They didn't look through me. A few offered polite nods. One woman, an executive from another division, simply said, "Thank you." I knew she wasn't talking about a technical report. Upstairs, in my suite, I reopened the notebook. 2021, Proprietary Research Contribution, uncredited. Outcome, crisis averted, silence expected. I paused. Then I wrote, now they see. But not because I asked them to, because I let them look. It was revelation, and once you see clearly, you don't unsee. By morning, the clip had already made it to Twitter, LinkedIn, and someone's cousin's Facebook page. I didn't post it. I didn't even know it had been recorded. But there it was. Grainy footage of me standing at the front of the gala, handing the box to my father, and saying the 7 words that cracked open decades of careful curation. From your biggest failure. Enjoy your retirement. People latched onto it like wildfire. There was a meme within hours. A slow zoom gif of Virgil's frozen face paired with hashtags that ranged from supportive to uncomfortably amused. But what caught me most wasn't the noise. It was the comments from people who recognized the undercurrent. Women who wrote, "I've lived this," or "I was the invisible daughter too." Then a post surfaced that changed everything. It came from a former systems analyst at Kessler Advanced, someone I hadn't worked with directly, but who knew the back channels well. She's the one who funded the survival project. I was there. That comment turned whispers into questions, and questions into phone calls. Less than 12 hours later, an internal finance officer at the company leaked a redacted spreadsheet. The recipient line was anonymized, but the routing number? It matched a holding account I once used to transfer money quietly years ago, when the company was drowning in budget shortfalls, and Denton had been parading around pretending everything was under control. That money, $200,000, came from me. It had been used to fund the company's innovation arm, the same one Denton now held up as the reason they were future-proofed. The same department featured in his interviews, the same initiative he credited in the toast that followed Virgil's speech. When board members saw the receipts, they asked for a meeting. Virgil refused. Denton tried spinning. It was a family effort, he claimed. We had private supporters, yes, but it was all under the Kessler vision. But then came the next blow. Someone found out about the tribute, the one I had sent days before the Galatha-framed photo, the note. I had tracked the package, knew it had arrived on time, but it never made it to the display table. A tech assistant confessed quietly to a mutual contact. We were told to swap it. Callista said it didn't match the visual brand of the event. What they replaced it with? A generic plaque with her name engraved at the bottom. It sat under the spotlight, while mine was likely stuffed into a closet somewhere backstage. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote the first thing I'd ever posted publicly about my family. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I told the truth in order. The funding, the decisions, the silence. I shared why I never spoke up before, because I believed it would make things worse. That I had confused loyalty with complicity. That silence is the currency of dysfunctional families, and I had spent mine for too long. It was never about being chosen, I wrote. It was about being truthful. The response? Overwhelming. STEM networks picked it up. Women's leadership forums quoted it. Former interns, professors, even quiet employees from years back messaged me with 2 words. Thank you. My name trended not for what I'd done, but for what I had finally confirmed. Back at headquarters, Virgil held a press conference or tried to. The statement was short, defensive, legal. Denton's face was drawn in every screenshot, like someone who knew the applause would never sound the same again. And me? I waited. Not for permission, not for applause, just for breath. Then I stood before a new audience and said what needed to be said. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. 3 days passed before I heard from him. No subject, no message. Just an email with a single attachment, 1 photo. Scanned. Slightly grainy. The same photo I had left in the box. Me at 12, beaming with my blue ribbon, his arm around my shoulder. Only now it was reframed, cropped tighter, enhanced for clarity. In the corner of the image, I spotted a reflection, his office wall. The frame hung next to one of his awards. It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it wasn't nothing. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to, trying to decide whether it was a sign of guilt or just a rearranged trophy. Either way, I didn't reply. I closed the laptop and left it shut. Later that night, another message arrived, this time from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 15 years. Gerald Lynn. He'd been a senior systems engineer back in my early career days at Kessler. One of the few who ever treated me like I belonged in the lab. His message was simple. I remember the first proposal. It had your fingerprints all over it. I was too afraid to speak back then. I'm sorry. I sat with that line for a while, unsure what it stirred in me. Anger? No. Sadness, maybe. but mostly just recognition. That kind of truth doesn't need to be shouted to count. I typed back, "You just did." No exclamation mark, no need. By morning, the online frenzy had shifted to something quieter, more focused. My open letter continued circulating, shared by scientists, journalists, advocacy groups. But it wasn't viral anymore. It was being studied, cited. I even saw a university ethics panel use it as a case study. Still, nothing had hit me as hard as the drawing. It came by mail crayon on thick paper, folded twice, with a sticker sealing it shut. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the front. It was Lumen. Inside, a sketch of me standing atop a rocket ship, written across its side in purple block letters, "Truth." Underneath was her message, "You're my favorite scientist. Love, Lumen." That one, I framed. Not the news clippings, not the spreadsheets, or the leaked memo, just that. I hung it next to my desk, where I could see it when I needed reminding that not every version of the family story had been poisoned. The day I left Austin, I took a slow walk around Lady Bird Lake. The city looked both familiar and far away, like something I used to dream of when I was younger, trying to decide if it could ever feel like home again. I didn't make peace with everything. That's not how real healing works. My father still hadn't said the words. Denton never retracted his claims. My mother remained somewhere between regret and loyalty, as she always had. But for once, I didn't need any of them to define me. I had stopped asking. I had stopped hoping they'd rewrite the story in my favor. I rewrote it myself. As I reached the last bend of the trail, sun glinting off the lake, a little boy on a scooter zoomed past me and nearly knocked over a woman walking her dog. She laughed it off, shook her head, and said aloud to no one in particular, "Kids always have to test the edge before they believe it's real." I smiled. Yeah, they do. Later, at the airport, as I sat by my gate waiting to board, I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed something not for anyone else, not to post, just for me. A conclusion, I guess. Or maybe just a beginning I hadn't dared to write before. You don't always get justice. Sometimes you just get your voice back. And that's enough. Some stories don't end with applause. They end in quiet clarity, when you finally understand that being unseen doesn't mean you were never there. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that protecting the family name was more important than protecting my truth. But silence is not grace when it erases you, and legacy should never come at the cost of someone else's voice. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't force people to give you what they don't know how to give. But you can stop asking. You can build your own table, even if they never offered you a seat at theirs. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to name what happened. And you are absolutely allowed to walk away without guilt. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped create? Or maybe you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. Tell me in the comments, type 1 if this story hit close to home. Or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate with you, I still want to know why. What did it make you think about? If this video moved you, if it made you stop and reflect, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We've got more to share, stories that are real, raw, and worth remembering. Thank you for being here. Your voice matters too.